Hi, I'm Ashton, and today I wanted to talk about something that's been kind of a constant theme on my channel throughout me being online, and that is how can someone be non-binary and male? If you weren't aware, I identify as trans-masculine, which means I was assigned female at birth, but I am not that, and I have socially and physically to a point transitioned into the social role of a male. That said, although I prefer to be addressed as and seen as and perceived as a man, I am also not entirely a man. So I wanted to talk about how that identity works for a bit, how I can identify as both a man and as non-binary. Because a lot of people seem to misunderstand that. I get a lot of questions about it, I get a lot of hate comments about it, and to some extent I do understand that confusion, and it's not an identity you come across every day, so I figured talking about it wouldn't hurt. So I have a video from late June in 2018 about how I identify and how I came to understand my non-binary identity in conjunction with my trans identity. So that might be a good video as like a prereq for this, but it's definitely not required. And if you don't want to watch it, like fucking don't, I don't care, do what you want. So I guess first I wanted to talk a little bit about like the particular misconceptions people have around my identity specifically, because I feel like a lot of the questions that people have about my identity come from very specific misunderstandings. So here's a comment on a video I made about transgenders, which went over well among my subscribers, I feel, but then other people found it and did not like it so much. So thank you to those of you that were positive or at the very least respectful about that video. I do appreciate that. But on that video, somebody said, gender expression and gender identity are two different things. You can express yourself by dressing however you want, but you don't need gender for every way you're dressing. You're not a non-binary boy if you're a boy who likes androgynous clothing, opposite way around. You also don't have to dress androgynous to be non-binary. That's just mostly what it's associated with. To some extent, I do agree with this. You don't have to dress androgynously to be non-binary, and you don't need a gender for every way you're dressing. I feel like people misunderstand this as me saying I'm non-binary because I present in a more androgynous way. That's not what it is. I would still identify with this gender if I was wearing a dress. I would still identify with this gender if I was dressing in a suit, as I did literally yesterday. But where this person misunderstands is that they're saying, you're not a non-binary boy if you're a boy who likes androgynous clothing. That's true. I'm not a non-binary boy because I'm a boy that wears androgynous clothing. I'm a non-binary boy because I identify very close to being a boy, but I'm not entirely that. My gender identity doesn't have anything to do with the clothes that I wear. I mean, it does, because gender presentation and gender identity, although they are two different things and they don't always intersect, they often do, and they are connected for me. But what I'm trying to get across is that no, my gender identity doesn't have to do with the fact that I'm a boy that wears androgynous clothing. My gender identity has to do with the fact that I identify very much as a boy, but still not entirely. And I don't understand why people like this feel the need to tell me that I'm not who I am simply because they don't agree with it or because they don't think that's how it works. Like, I am of the belief that you never have the right to critique someone else's identity or tell somebody else how to identify, and that's kind of what this person's doing. And, you know, to end off this comment, they said, not everything needs a label. Sometimes you need to do research. True, I would agree that not everything needs a label. Like, you don't have to label yourself if you're not comfortable with it. But for me, the label of being a non-binary boy is comfortable, and that is how I identify. And I don't like it when people like this take that away from me simply because that's not how they see me. So that's kind of on the more rude side of things. And then there are people that I appreciate that will send comments like, when you said you're a non-binary boy, how does that work? I'm not saying that in a hurtful way, it's a genuine question, like, is there a boy, girl, and non-binary in the middle, so how could you really be both? So this comes from a place of, like, curiosity and wanting to understand how my gender works and how gender as a whole works, which I appreciate. Like, I think that's a good way of phrasing it, like, hey, out of respect, like, how does this work? As opposed to this other person being like, you're not a non-binary boy. So the misunderstanding with this comes from their understanding of non-binary. They defined it for themselves as like non-binaries in the middle of boy and girl, but non-binary is more of an umbrella term for any gender identity that doesn't entirely fall as male or female. Binaries in general are a very like Western ideal, but to kind of compare this to another westernized binary, let's talk about sexuality for a bit. So of course, gender and sexuality are very, very different, but in some ways the way that we describe them can overlap. I consider myself demisexual and pansexual, but I often call myself gay because it's another label that's comfortable for me and that fits for me, especially because I am dating a man and I lean towards dating men. So there are people out there that see sexuality as like, you are either homosexual or heterosexual, and those are the two. So if we were to look at gender that way with male and female, homosexual homosexual and heterosexual. Anything other than those two would be considered non-binary. A binary system of opposition is one in which there are only two concrete options present. So anything non-binary would be something either in between, like this person said, or outside of it, or like anywhere other than those two specific exact binaries. And that's how my gender is. I'm not non-binary because I don't identify with being a male. I'm non-binary because while I identify with being a male, that's not my entire gender identity. Although it is a large part of it, there are still parts of me that I don't feel are completely male. Not like compartmentalized parts, but like my gender identity as a whole. While I am comfortable with the label of male, I'm more comfortable with the idea of being like partly male or mostly male, as opposed to like 100% binary-wise male. So non-binary refers to any gender identity that isn't explicitly male or explicitly female, which is why a lot of trans people are in fact binary, and the majority of people that identify as cis are also binary. Someone with a binary gender identity is literally just anybody that identifies as 100% male or 100% female. Me, on the other hand, I identify as like 75% male and 25% just somewhere outside of that male-female binary, not 25% female, not 25% no gender, not 25% bigender, 25% just not binary. So again, the person that asked that question did it very respectfully, and I appreciated it, and I did end up replying, but somebody else actually replied before I got the chance to in a very demeaning way. And I really appreciated that the original commenter just kind of ignored that and went with my response. Like, that was very kind. But this other person said, you can't be a non-binary boy. First off, non-binary isn't scientifically possible, but I'll still respect people. That's a whole other argument. I could and I will do a whole video on the concept of scientifically possible genders, because gender is more sociological, which is a science, but still, gender is more sociological than biological or scientific in any discrete way. But regardless, this person says that non-binary isn't scientifically possible, but they'll still respect people, which I find interesting, because in another sentence of their comment, they said, I mean, I'm sure he means he's non-binary, but what he actually is just gender non-conforming. While I am gender non-conforming, while I am not like entirely conforming to the gender of male, I'm also non-binary. This is, again, like a thing where I genuinely don't understand why this person thinks that they're allowed to critique my gender. Like, oh yeah, he thinks he's non-binary, he's actually just gender non-conforming. If you think I'm gender non-conforming, cool, because I kind of am, but also another part of my identity is that I'm non-binary, and you can't just brush that off because it's inconvenient for you. Another person in the same thread of comments said, non-binary is literally a lack of gender. It's impossible to be one gender and neither at the same time, but you do you, I guess, lol. So again, this comes from the place of thinking that non-binary means literally no gender. That would be agender. Non-binary, as I've kind of stated before in this video, is an umbrella term for literally any person that is not 100% male identifying or 100% female identifying. Similar to how saying somebody is LGBT doesn't mean they're explicitly just a lesbian or explicitly just gay, saying somebody's non-binary doesn't mean they entirely lack gender. Saying someone's non-binary just means that they don't exactly fit into being a male or a female, and that's where I come in. I fit very closely into being a male, but I don't feel entirely male. This next comment is from someone that comments on my videos fairly frequently, and they asked, so are you a trans boy or a non-binary person? And I replied, both. Because that's the truth. And then they said, how can you be both when one term reverses the other? Trans boy is binary and non-binary isn't. This is another thing. Trans boy isn't exactly always binary. There are a lot of people that identify as trans boys and still aren't exactly binary trans boys. A lot of people seem to think that being trans means you are binary, because I feel like a lot of people see being trans as going from like one gender to the complete opposite other binary end of gender. But that's not exactly how it works. For a lot of people it is, and for a lot of people that's how they are comfortable, and that's totally cool. If you're a binary trans person, rad, you go. I'm proud of you for figuring out who you are, but for me, that's not who I am. I was assigned female at birth, assigned on this one concrete binary end of the spectrum, and now I don't identify that way. I identify much more with being a male, but also not like exactly entirely male. So I'm still transgender because I was assigned female at birth, and I don't identify as such. I experienced dysphoria, I've physically and socially transitioned. Like, in all definitions of the word, I'm transgender, but I'm also non-binary because that transition and my gender expression and my gender identity do not fall entirely within that male box. My gender identity is something that I feel like I'm very open about, and I feel like it's something that I talk a lot about. And when people like this misconstrue it as that's impossible or like that can't be your gender identity, I'm gonna pick apart your expression and tell you that you're just gender nonconforming, you're not non-binary, fight me. I just think it's really odd. Like, I genuinely don't understand how people can look at someone else and be like, no, you're completely male. Like, you can't identify any other way. I'm sorry. I feel like I'm pretty open about my gender identity online and being non-binary and being trans at the same time, but it still does confuse a lot of people. So I hope this video helped clear some things up for you. Or if you are non-binary, then I hope that I related to you in some way, or that this helped you better understand my gender and my understanding of who I am, because you are not in a place where you can tell me who I am. Like, I'm sorry, but if you're gonna comment like you can't be non-binary and trans, like, okay, if you think that, cool, go about your day, but I'm gonna just sit here, I'm still gonna exist, like, you're not stopping me from existing. I don't know what you think you're gonna do down there, but whatever. So, you know, if you still think that I'm not non-binary, or that I'm not trans, or that those two identities just cannot ever so slightly overlap, cool, you do you, but I'm just gonna keep existing and keep talking about how I experience my gender, and you can't really stop me, so I'm sorry, but I'm still here. Anyways, thank you for listening. I hope this may have cleared some things about my gender up, or I hope that other non-binary people can kind of relate to me, or maybe this helps them better understand their gender. So thank you, goodbye, I love you, and I hope that you all have an incredible day, and I hope that you all are very comfortable with how you describe your gender, and I'll talk to you later, maybe.